Welcome back to the Health Elevated podcast. Today, we have an interesting conversation based off of an article posted at health.com written by Sarah Garone titled, What Happens to Your Mood When You Take Omega-3s Regularly? David, Dr. Hedges, omega-3s, those are healthy fats in a very simplified way to talk about them. And a lot of times people are taking these to help with overall heart health. And I see a lot of people taking them in like pill form with like omega-3s and omega-6s are usually paired together, some kind of fish oil and whatnot. So when you hear that title, what do you think? What comes to mind? Omega-3s and your mood?
A lot. I'd like to see the article. You haven't shown it to me yet. But I think about the effects of a lot of lipids on neurological processes. So lipids are fats essentially, and omega-3s are a lipid. Various lipid components have both direct and indirect effects on a lot of the brain's functioning. So I think, yes, consuming lipids, I could see there being a very plausible mechanism for affecting mood, affecting outlook, all of that, or even some cases disease. I also start to think about confounding factors. I'd like to understand that more. For example, omega-3 sources, depending on what those are, a lot of the omega-3 sources, like salmon, are healthier foods. And so if you transition from a low omega-3 diet to a high omega-3 diet, there could be some confounds there as you transition from a generally unhealthy to a more healthy diet. That could Anyway, that's where my mind goes. I don't want to ramble too much there.
Yeah. So the question they're posing in this article is, can omega-3s boost your mood? And they say that some research suggests that omega-3s may improve mood. So kind of soft language there, but only in certain circumstances, experts stress. So there is some research out there that associates the consumption of omega-3s with improved mood. And one of the areas that people kind of care about in regards to mood is depression, anxiety, which we know has been skyrocketing over the last few years as far as diagnoses of depression and anxiety are concerned. And so omega-3s, could that be somewhat of an answer? And kind of yes, no. So they cite a 2023 observational study that found people with mild or moderate depression who combined omega-3s with 3 different types of SSRI medications over 2 years experienced a significant decline in depressive symptoms. So SSRI, those would be, what are SSRI? Do you know?
They're antidepressants, yeah. So
Okay,
they're
that's what I thought.
serotonin reuptake inhibition.
Excellent. Meanwhile, in 2021, there was a review. So reviews basically look at a bunch of other studies and try to get the overall outcome of all those studies in aggregate. And this review concluded that compared with a placebo, omega-3s may offer, quote, small to modest benefits for depression. Small to modest benefits for depression. So your thoughts on that, David?
I guess I'm a little uncomfortable saying anything without reading the papers and actually seeing the statistics and the methods. It's intriguing. It's enough to make me want to learn more, but I've got a healthy level of skepticism. I want to actually look at the paper, evaluate the journal, see if it's peer reviewed.
It is peer reviewed, so it's good to be skeptical. And I think the reason you're skeptical because you do research and whatnot, and you know that, sometimes news media can take things that aren't actually concluded in papers and run with them because they like the headline. Though I got to say, this particular article is written a lot more soft than I've seen other articles in the past written. Maybe this is how health.com operates. I'm not really sure about. But so the way they've written it, it actually seems more fair in line with research. I know there's been stories in the past where researchers will publish a paper. In fact, I know a virologist at a university I studied at that he would write these papers. The news media would take the headline part of the paper, like by extracting parts of the conclusion, then assigning some kind of level of causality that wasn't actually present in the paper, and then just running these headlines. And he would be on his like Twitter account, Twitter back then, X now, just like all caps, like, this is not what my research says. Stop. You guys are going way too far with this. So your skepticism is a good thing because That's one thing that I think everyone should understand is if you're reading an article about articles, there can be very valuable information that is lost in the weeds. And sometimes conclusions can be taken way beyond their intended scope. But again, having said that, I think the language here does lend itself to at least a little bit more softer language when it says it may improve only in certain circumstances, that it I think seems to more accurately talk about what these papers are actually doing. And as far as like causality here, an observational study in 2023, it found an association with omega 3s and but interacted with SSRI medications. So anything with causality is basically like, how do you even determine that in that case? It's interesting. You get some level of correlation there, but even then it was mild is what it seems to be the case.
Yeah,
And
with that though, I'd really want to dig in and figure out were there proper controls. Three different types of SSRI medications. SSRIs are a class of antidepressants. So we got three different SSRIs. Was there dosage modification over this time period? If they combine the omega 3s, I mean, did they play around with dosage of the omega 3s? How did they account for differences in diet and exercise? How did they control that against combined and general SSRI, like the dosage categories? And how did they appropriately align this so that we can actually say, yes, taking omega 3s suggested a benefit over the SSRIs? And I'd want to look at the actual numbers. I think a lot of times, like a moderate statistical significance, I think can, like, when the statistics are really weak, is I guess what I'm trying to say, it's very difficult to take those findings outside of the specific restrictions of the study. And they
right,
may not be applicable. It's really hard to take research out of the research realm, put it into the applicability of daily life.
exactly. Like a lot of times you'll find that something within that research paper had significant results, but in practice, in a more general population, outside of the research population, those significant results can potentially fade away. But it's no surprise that omega 3 polyunsaturated fatty acids or omega 3 fatty acids are healthy to consume. And I would bet that in the United States, probably most people need to eat more omega 3s and omega 6s. I'm just guessing here, but that's something interesting that I think people could definitely discuss with their doctors. Hey, is this worth supplementing on and or like focusing on eating foods that are more rich in omega 3s? And I think most doctors would probably be like, yeah, because unfortunately, like the diet that most people tend to follow, we're not eating salmon every day. It's an expensive meat. And salmon's not the only one, but it's like the main one people think of when it comes to the
Right.
omegas. Like I'm guessing that most people could use more omega 3s, whether or not that's actually going to impact mood. I think right now, at
Well,
least on the limited information we have, is like maybe.
I think also the source of the omega 3 fatty acids is going to make a huge difference. So I'd really want
Mm,
to understand, is just taking a dietary supplement, is that enough? Because it seems like a lot of the studies I've looked at recently, there's been a trend where it's best if you get the particular nutrient that you're looking at, nutrient or mineral, from whole food sources as opposed to getting those from supplement, pure isolated supplement form. And this is something I don't know. It's possible that there have been studies. I haven't looked into it. I don't know how that works out with the omega 3 to omega 6 ratios. So like is it just as beneficial for all the different disease states to take supplements of omega acids, or should you really be getting them from whole food sources? And if that's the case, I feel like if the latter is the case, so if you should be getting them from whole food sources, there's a lot there that we really won't understand, and especially when you get into the complexities of something like a mood disorder. Like you get like getting like improving your diet is going to have improvements on your health across the board, and you start to get all sorts of other micronutrient benefits, many of which are really poorly understood in the world of nutrition. We know they're important, but we don't know the extent of which for some micronutrients. But if you start eating more whole food sources, it should, my hypothesis, untested, So I'll own that. But my hypothesis is that this will have impacts on mood disorders in and of itself, which would
Yeah, it's
be a
hard.
huge confound to this particular finding.
Yeah, it's really hard in health research to extract the single variable. Even randomized control trials aren't fully immune to being able to completely extract
To
the
do that, you
single
just need
effect of a
such
variable.
huge sample sizes, and it becomes prohibitively expensive to work with that number of people. And so many people drop out of studies, all sorts of other things happen.
Not to
So, yeah.
mention that a lot of these health related studies have some serious ethical concerns. In the past, I know science was willing to withhold syphilis treatment to black
Well,
people in its racist past. And so you're not going to assign to understand, for example, like smoking and the causality behind smoking. You're not going to assign a group of people to smoke and a group of people not to smoke. Have twins, half of them are randomly assigned to smoke and the others aren't. That's how you'd get closer. But like in health, there's not only are we dealing with all the problems we already mentioned, but there's some ethical things to be concerned about as well, which forces us to be way more in the realm of observation and trying to find like natural types of experimentation. And that can also introduce additional complexity to understanding these more causal relationships. But
yeah.
we preach all the time that healthy behaviors are important, sticking to healthy behaviors and being involved with your health. On our last episode, we talked about knowing your numbers. I think knowledge is power. And there might be some ambiguity on like the specifics on like omega 3s, for example, like we're talking about today. And I think that those things can be interesting. But at the end of the day, when it comes to actually applying these things in your life, I think sometimes the cognitive load of thinking about the micronutrients in every single thing someone is eating is too much.
Way
And
too much.
instead, if you just focus on like kind of the broader, bigger habits and instead of worrying about like every single micro thing, then I think you're more likely to develop the habits and then those long-term benefits can be huge. But I want to ask you this,
Yes.
David, real quick. So I think that's an interesting hypothesis about the whole foods versus like supplementation. But would you at least concede that going from, in this case, we're talking about omega 3s, no omega 3s to supplementing them is probably a bigger jump in your health than going from supplemented omega 3s to whole food omega 3s.
I would say probably, but I don't know for sure.
It's just a hypothesis that we're throwing out here that should be tested or at least continue to be studied. But it's an interesting thing to think about because, like, maybe that isn't the case. I would hypothesize that introducing omega 3s is more important than like where it comes from. So if people aren't doing it, then like I don't want to scare people away from like supplementation of it because it's not the best. And sometimes people will get handicapped in trying to move forward with something because it's not the best way to do it. But that doesn't mean the second best way to do it can't still benefit your health. You know what I mean? Like you might
That's
not be
probably
perfect at
true.
how you exercise, but at least doing something is better than doing nothing. And I think that step, arguably in a lot of cases, and I have no idea for the nutrient stuff, this is kind of more in your area, I think, with the biochemistry. But I think in a lot of cases, just doing anything, even if it's completely wrong, is going to benefit you more than doing the wrong thing and then improving it to something else. Like just the initial first step.
That's an interesting idea. So let me counter that by asking a question. So you, with your knowledge of sticking to healthy behaviors, like if we start to look into these things and people start to look in and try to figure out, okay, I need to take these 5 supplements every day, is that more sustainable than people just trying to eat a healthy diet and trying to get a variety of foods that they're eating, eat a variety of vegetables, a variety of grains, a variety of meats, just to cover their bases as much as possible through eating traditional healthy foods? Is that more sustainable, or is it more sustainable to just run down to the local drugstore, buy 5 or 6 different bottles and have try to keep track of each tablet every day?
That is a very interesting question. I love that question. And the first initial answer, as always with anything in science, is it depends. It depends on the person. If we are to assume that a person could get fairly easily their nutritions that they need from their food, which I think is another separate question in and of itself that I think you have a lot of opinions on. But we'll throw that to the side for now, like assuming that the food is nutritious enough to where it wouldn't take much of a lift besides focusing on what is being consumed, like choosing something that's more a whole food over something that's not, and you're going to eat it anyway, because you already have the habit of eating, if you will, because you kind of have to have that habit because you will feel
We all tend to do
gross
that.
if you don't.
Yeah.
And that's one of the telltale signs of a habit is what how do you feel if you don't do it? So everyone has like an eating habit because if you don't do it, you feel crappy
You
and that
and
makes you
die. Like you won't live
and
long
die.
if you stop
Yeah,
eating.
it's
Like
almost
there's
silly to talk about it as a habit, but we can frame it that way for the sake of what we're talking about here. And so the difference is it easier to modify that habit as opposed to completely introduce another one? And I think that introducing another habit would take more time to potentially set up. But it's just one of those things that it really depends. If someone is capable of just slightly modifying their diet in such a way that the cognitive load is low, then I think that'd be the easier way because then you don't have to introduce a whole new habit altogether. Because I haven't done much when it comes to food eating because that's a very complex behavior. But I have taking medications or taking supplements and like the habit formation around that from these kind of quantitative methods that I used in study. You do have to develop that habit. And from what we found in the particular use case we were looking at is that and the novelty of the research is like how we are able to find these things. But in that particular application of our methods is when it comes to taking pills, you want to get as close to taking it within the same time of day as possible. And the closer you are to being within a certain time threshold of taking it every day, the more likely you are to stick to it in the long term and to continue sticking to it. But that does require a development of working that habit muscle and like creating that consistency over time to where it becomes an automatic response to the stimuli of the time of day, potentially in this case, along with maybe whatever
yeah.
other context is happening for the
But
individual.
my point with this is saying either you're going to have to change your behavior. If you want to increase your micronutrient availability, in this case, if you want to increase omega 3s, if you want to do that, you're motivated by that. It's a good motivation. There's good research to suggest that it'll improve your health overall. But you're going to have to change your behavior in some way, which will either require the modification of a habit or the development of a new habit. And if you're going to have to do something anyway, why not just go with the better of the two options? Now, obviously, for some people, it's probably the easiest option is probably just buying a new bottle of pills and working that in. But if you have to do something, why not just go for the better?
Yeah, yeah. I think it just comes down to whichever, like you said, the easiest option, the one that you're able to stick to, is the better option because that's how you're going to see the health benefits. And yeah, maybe that's going to help with depression, anxiety. Maybe it won't. I certainly think that paying attention to this research about depression, anxiety, and like supplementation or exercise or any type of treatment is worth paying attention to because I do think it's something that is a concern for the population at large, is a concern for individuals, especially during the wintertime when the sun is not as strong and people can get that sad seasonal whatever it stands for.
Seasonal affective
Uh,
depressive disorder, I think is what the
yeah,
name
yeah,
is.
yes. Thank you. I knew you could pull it out. Be clutch for me there as I just pulled out an acronym without thinking about what it meant or what it would stands for. But yeah, so this is a definitely an interesting conversation and one that I think we'll continue to have in the future. David, Dr. Hedges, any last words on this topic?
No last words. Maybe a last thought is like things like this, articles like this, there's a zillion of them out there. I don't think that any of us need to know that certain ingredients, certain things are important to have in our diet. We've heard these things for decades. I think that these could provide little reminders of yes, it's important, and not read too much into the potential sensationalism of the particular article, but just remember, yes, having omega 3s, whether those are from natural sources, whether those are from isolated sources, that's good for you. And that's something that you should remember to do. And I think these can be reminders for that. Other examples, consuming olive oil as opposed to other types of fats. That's a good thing that's been shown repeatedly to have pretty big health benefits. We don't need to get caught up in the sensationalism if someone says such and such a food supplement can has been shown in a recent article to cure symptoms of XYZ. I don't think that we need to use that as fodder to say, I don't believe that sensationalism. I'm not going to do this. I think at the end of the day, we all have really a strong understanding of what healthy eating is. We've been taught it for our entire lives. Eat lots of vegetables, eat whole foods, eat in moderation, avoid sweets. In these basic things, I think those are the key principles that we all really need to stick to. And when we see articles, sensational articles like this, perhaps there's something to it. Perhaps there's good science behind it. Perhaps there's not. But it shouldn't detract from our interest in just trying to eat a healthy diet, irrespective of what the current sensationalism is.
I like it. I think that's really good thoughts from our very own Dr. David Hedges. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you're willing, give us a 5-star review. Let us know what you think in a comment section. And please consider following or subscribing wherever you're listening to this podcast. This is Health Elevated. We'll catch you in the next one.